Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really thrilled to be here. And we are just going to launch right in. We're going to try to show you 3 really fabulous baked goods, but also talk a little bit about our book, Rage Baking, The Transformative Power of Flour, Fury, and Women's Voices. And a lot of people, I'm Kathy Gunst, by the way. This is Katherine Alford.
I'm Katherine Alford. I'm here in New York, and Kathy is in Maine. And people are all over the country. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, we're really glad to be here. And hopefully we'll all get to meet in person at this festival next year. Things go well. I wanted to just read you quickly a quote at the very beginning of our book, because it sets the tone of really, a lot of people say, what is rage baking? What is this concept? And it actually goes way back in time, back during the Revolutionary War, when women did not have the right to vote. On election days, women would spend the days in their kitchen. Women have been taking refuge in their kitchen forever. As many of you know, it is a place of safety, it is a place of home and hearth, and it is a place where we get to create. But on election days, way back when, women would bake election cakes. There were these dense fruit-filled cakes, and it was a rebellion of sorts. It was a way of getting involved in the election day, even though they didn't have the right to vote. Then you segue to the civil rights movement, when there were secret kitchens and women would bake pies and cakes and cookies to raise funds for Martin Luther King and other activists. And rage baking at that time was a way of forwarding a cause and using baking and the home and the kitchen to earn money to help people to go out and fight. Then you move up to the year 2000, you see rage baking appearing in novels, nonfiction, social media. It has a long history, the idea of women having anger, women having rage, but also women baking. So briefly, I'm just going to read you a quote from the amazing Maya Angelou, who says, "You should be angry. You must not be bitter. Bitterness is like a cancer. It eats upon the host. It doesn't do anything to the object of its displeasure. So use that anger. You write it, you paint it, you dance it, you march it, you vote it, you do everything about it. You talk it. Never stop talking it." And during this election year, boy, that's a message we need to hear. And then very quickly underneath it, Gloria Steinem says, "The truth will set you free, but first, it will piss you off." And on that note, Katherine.
Hi. So we're going to be doing 3 recipes for the book tonight. I'm going to do, the first one I'm going to do is a marbled black and white cookie. And this is a really cool technique to sort of make a fun looking cookie. I have some here. This is where we're going with this. Can you see this? It's two for one. You know, if you have to decide between vanilla and chocolate, why? So this is, instead of, you know, there's a long tradition of like patchwork cakes and quilting like things, which can be very fastidious and like a little difficult to do. So I wanted to make this a lot easier and a lot more fun. So, and doable. And that was also one of the commitments we had, and when we were doing this book, was to make sure the recipes were easy and very doable to work out that rage. So the first thing I have here is basically, it's a pretty standard sugar cookie dough, which I made earlier. It's flour, sugar, a little bit of vanilla, and of course butter. And I mix it all together. Then what I do is I divide it in half, and half of it I'm going to leave just as a plain white cookie, like the plain sugar cookie that this is. Well, actually these, and then what I did is I formed them all into little teeny balls just to make it easier, and I'll show you how this is when I make the chocolate. I melted chocolate with a little bit more butter, which is here in this bowl, and I melted it over a double boiler, or you can do it in a microwave, either one. And to really amp up the chocolate, I'm adding in some cocoa, and then to sort of mirror those flavors of like Mexican chocolate, I'm putting a little bit of cinnamon in here. And so I mix these two together, and this is going to flavor half of the batter. So I'm going to mix that into there. Can you, my handy dandy, tip it down a little bit so you can see. There you go. Mix that into there. And then I'm just going to mix, oh, no, don't do that. There we go. And it's really an essential thing in this world to have power, and you have to plug it in.
You're asking a lot.
Yeah, I know. There we go. There we go. And so I mix this in.
And Catherine, this is half the dough, correct?
I'm sorry, what? I can't hear you.
This is half the dough.
Yes, this is half the dough. Half the dough gets to be chocolate, and half the dough becomes, get this going a little higher. There we go. And you mix that in. And in theory, and honestly, you could just leave them as two separate doughs and have two different kinds of cookies. There. And there we go. Okay. Just gonna take that off here. Get this out of the way. And this is kind of the fun part to do here. So I have the two, so my chocolate dough and then the vanilla dough, which I've already balled up. And I get a piece of parchment paper. Can everyone see? If you can't see, just speak up, Kathy.
So far, you're good. Yeah, I wanted to let everyone know that we're happy to take questions or comments on the chat, and I will be monitoring it throughout the hour, and we would love to hear what you're thinking, and if you're having a question or trouble seeing. Yeah, can we get the camera a little bit lower, Catherine?
Yeah, Robert, yeah, there you go. That's great. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm creating a little bit of a patchwork, and just for the time thing, I did these in little balls, but you could just take a spoon, or I'm using a little cookie press. And then what I do is I just dollop, and the more sort of random it is, the more fun the pattern will be. So I like push this in, and you can make this in one big long roll, or just drop it in like this. It's not fussy. It's actually very, very, the sort of more random it is, the more fun the pattern will become when you make it. So I'm dropping this in. It's going to be about 3 inches wide, a mix of like chocolate and vanilla. It's your best kind of swirl that you're doing here. Alternate them, drop this in.
Quilt. It's like a crazy quilt.
It is very much like a crazy quilt. And there's lots of metaphors there for us to think about. So I'm just kind of, and you can like drop it. This is something that would be great to do with your kids. Drop it in. It's very free form. And the more free form it is, kind of the more fun the pattern will be. So I just kind of like drop it all in. And then this is like kind of making a party favor. So I have it on a piece of parchment. You could do this.
Like those New Year's Eve wrappers that you
Yeah, like, ooh, you go like that. And you turn this on over, and that's when, and I have my pastry scrape, and I just start pulling it tight. And that's gonna then bring the doughs together. And you can make it as, the more you push, the tighter it will be. If you want it long and thin, you would do it like super tight like this. Or if you want a nice big fat cookie, you just don't press it as much. So I press this together.
The chocolate and the vanilla cookies are all just kind of blending together.
They blend, but they keep separate. And then I move this and I pull up, and this is a great slice and bake cookie that then I'll twist the ends off to get it nice and tight. And I put this in the refrigerator, or I actually keep these in the freezer for those late nights when I really want a cookie. And so I have this here. I let that sit for 2 hours, or at least until it's firm. So here I have this here. And you can see this is a log in the pattern. And then it's kind of fun because each cookie becomes completely different and unique. So you create this cool pattern with them. I cut them about a ½ inch. And these are like, you can flip, these are a great, as I said, a great slice and bake cookie. They hold in the freezer for a really long time. I put them on my silicone mat, about an inch or two apart. Bake them for about 20 minutes. And then you have like the perfect kind of match of spice and chocolate. I'm going to just put this in the oven. And then time lapse, 20 minutes. Then you get this really fun and delicious.
So pretty.
They're really pretty. They're like, they remind me of Italian marble paper. And there's lots of, like, you can make it chocolate or with a little bit of cocoa, obviously is what was in the recipe, but add a little coffee if you like that to make them a little mocha. I'm a big fan of malt, so you could put a little bit of malt in there, but it's very adaptable. So that's cookie number 1. And now take it away, Kathy.
Okay.
You're going to, I'm going to eat a cookie.
No fair, everybody. You can complain on the chat room if you want to. I am going to make a very simple galette. And a galette is like a rustic open-faced pie. Sometimes they're called crostadas. And I'm going to show you how we do it here. So I want to start by introducing this. This is a $8 kitchen scale. When Catherine and I were testing the recipes on the book, I did not own one of these. And we would test a recipe and she would say, it's perfect. And I'd say, no, it's not. Mine didn't come out well. And then we got into this whole thing about how do you measure your flour? How do you scoop it? Put it in a spoon. And as soon as I got the scale, the precision and my baking improved 1,000-fold overnight. True, Catherine?
Very true. I mean, because, you know, if you have flour that's packed in your container or in the bag, you know, you can really actually, like 1 cup of flour can be anywhere from 4 ounces to 5.5 ounces. And in a delicate cookie, or it can really, or a cake, particularly in cakes, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
and
true.
Scale,
So,
I love the scale because you can put your bowl right there,
exactly.
as Kathy has, and there you are. You don't have to have as many things to
I
clean
put
up.
the scale to 0. I needed 180 grams of flour. That's what I've got. I'm going to add a pinch of salt, fine salt. Do not underestimate the power of salt in your baking. It's really, really crucial. It highlights sugar. It highlights fruit. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar. This pastry is completely adaptable for a savory version as well. And if you wanted to, you could add fresh herbs to the dough, or you could not add the sugar and add maybe some fresh ground pepper or sea salt. Now I am going to do this. We're going to mix up the sugar and the salt and the flour. And then I have 1 stick of well-chilled butter that I've cut into small pieces. Normally, I do this in a food processor because they tend to run hot and I'm always worried about melting the butter. But as a challenge today, I wanted to do it by hand. And what I'm doing is I'm using my pastry blender to blend the butter into the flour. And I want it to look like coarse cornmeal. That's how I'll know when the butter is small enough and incorporated enough. And then Catherine taught me this. The flour actually starts to tint a pale yellow. And that's a great sign to see, oh, okay, my butter's in enough, I can stop.
And that's very important because when the butter coats the flour, that's what keeps your pie crust really tender. It's that when it says shortening, it's shortening how the flour will turn into gluten. And so the way when you want the butter in like some very small pieces coating it and some nice big nuggets. And that's where you get that wonderful texture in your dough.
And I would say that I am just about there. Some of it's quite small and there are still a few pieces. Now what we want
Kathy, can I just say something? If you don't have a pastry blender, you do that thing of like rubbing it in with your hands. And it's and my suggestion is always do it like over the bowl. If you keep your hands down in the bowl, you will heat up your butter. So to lift it and sort of, you're sort of you're tumbling, think of it tumbling and tumble and crumble.
Yeah.
Keep that thought in your head, tumble and crumble.
And I'm just working some of these larger pieces of butter. I don't need them all exactly uniform, but I'm pretty happy with that. So you always have your hands. This is about $4. Everybody says to us, oh, do I need to buy all this fancy equipment? You really, really don't. Now the trick is to add liquid, and you want your liquid to be ice cold. So I've got ice water here. Now, here's another trick. Vodka. Yes, I said vodka. I add 2 tablespoons of ice water, not with the ice, and I'm going to give it a stir. Now, because COVID has been going on for quite a while, I have run out of vodka. We don't have to talk about it that much, but if I had some, I would add a tablespoon right now. Katherine, you want to explain what the vodka is all about?
Yes. If we all remember, like when we used to make Play-Doh, or you make Play-Doh for your kids now, and you add water into flour, and the more you mix it, it gets that kind of webby, gooey kind of to it. That's gluten. And that's what you want in bread. It's not what you want in a pie crust. You want it short strands of gluten. When you add vodka, it moistens it, but it doesn't interact in the same way to stimulate the gluten strands. So it sort of helps to keep the dough very tender.
And vodka, as we know, has many uses other than this. I'm adding about another tablespoon and a half of water. Now, how will I know when this is ready? If I were working in the Cuisinart, I would look for it to just be coming off the sides of the bowl. But what I'm doing here is just mixing it together and seeing if it holds together. And it's still a bit crumbly. See all that flour down there? So I need a little bit more, but not a lot. I'm just about there. So I added a little bit less than another tablespoon, and I can feel that I'm ready. It's okay if there's some flour that has still stuck to the bottom. So what we're gonna do, talk amongst yourselves.
Well, and that's really important to realize that the dough will hydrate more as it rests. So if you add so much liquid in that it's like this whole sort of like mass together or balled up or anything like that, it's going to get tough. And also, if you've always noticed in your pie crust that you roll it out and you have it in your nice, beautiful thing, and then it shrinks away, that's a lot of the water and the steam evaporating. So you want to have, it's that nice balance of not too much, not too little, and that's what brings it together. And yeah, Kathy's going to do one of my favorite things of how to bring a pie crust together.
I love avoiding plastic. This is just plain old wax paper, but if you have recycled, like bees wrap or those things, I'm making a little package. I'm going to use this wax paper to just push this together into a round disc. And you can now pop this into your freezer for 3 to 4 months, or it can be refrigerated for 3 days. You want it to chill for at least 2 hours because you want to work with a cold dough. So I made one.
If you suddenly say, oh my God, I have to make a pie crust, I think a half an hour is a good place to be. And what you can do is really press it down into that disc when you make it so that it will chill faster.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not the best, particularly in the summer. People come by unexpectedly and I want to make a pie. I'll throw it in the freezer for 15, 20 minutes and it'll be good to go. So I've floured my surface here. Get you down here. And I want to roll this out. I want to force evenly. I don't want to thin one area. So I'm constantly going to be moving the dough, making sure it's not sticking. You'll notice I'm not using a ton of flour, but because it chilled, it's really nicely rolling out evenly. And I'm watching the thickness of it, and I want about a 14-inch round.
One of the key things when you're rolling a dough is, as Kathy said, is to always keep it moving. You also make sure you don't roll over those edges because then it will stick to the counter. And if at any point the dough gets too like sticky or unwieldy, you're in charge. Just remember, I always used to say to my students, you're smarter than the dough. Put it back in the refrigerator for a couple minutes, slip it onto a sheet pan or something, and just let it chill. The key in a really successful pie dough is keeping that butter cold.
Yeah. So you can see it's a little ragged on the edges, which is actually fine, because you're going to see what I'm going to do is I'm going to flap the edges over and even them and neaten them out. I just am going to grab my cookie tray. And I have a piece of parchment paper here. I'm going to transfer my dough right there, and then I'm going to get my filling ready. This is going to ideally chill while you're dealing with your filling. So in the summer, I love to make this because I live in Maine with wild berries, raspberries, blueberries, but it is the fall and it is apple season. So I have a bunch of apples here. The more varieties you use, sort of like wine, the more textures, the more different varieties of flavors. And then I have a neighbor who has a pear tree, and these are the ugliest pears you've ever seen, but they are spectacular. So it's the old, never judge a book by its cover. Just gonna.
But our cover's awesome, Kathy.
Our cover is awesome. That's true. Show them our cover.
Let me get the cover here. Hold on.
I'm just going to peel 1 or 2, maybe 3 different varieties of apples and thinly slice them. I'm going to toss them with a bunch of spices, nutmeg, cinnamon, ginger. Where's my knife? Sorry. You think you're so organized until you're not.
So while Kathy's slicing up those apples, this galette kind of became our go-to thing for both around for, talking about the book, because it's incredibly adaptable. So she's doing a sweet one. There's a recipe for that in the book, but you could do exactly what she's doing, apples, pears, but add a little bit of onion with it and maybe a little bit of bacon, or toss in some cheddar cheese, or even maybe a blue cheese. I have just sort of become like galette crazy of just using, I'll open up, if I have the dough and I want to do something savory with it, it's the perfect form. I don't change the dough in any way just because it's savory. And now with like butternut squash coming into the market, I just did a whole recipe with butternut squash and apples and a little bit of onion. And it's become sort of like it's a really go-to thing to have in your repertoire.
And I almost always try to keep a batch of this dough in my freezer so that, all of a sudden someone comes by and they're like, my peach tree just bloomed, here are some peaches, or somebody says we had a lot of raspberries, or I go pick blueberries. So they're great to have around. So I've got apples and pear here. I think I'll do 1 more pear. Seriously, when I saw these pears, I'm like, look, they're really not attractive, but they have this incredible, almost cinnamony aroma, and they're quite juicy, and they really add a nice flavor to it. As I said earlier, if you were going to do a savory one, you could add fresh rosemary. Oh, this one's a little messed up. You could add fresh rosemary to your dough or sprinkle it in. You can't go wrong with these. Okay, so I've got apples and pears here. I am going to add some sugar, and not a ton, you'll notice. I have got a fresh nutmeg here. If you can find one of these nifty little old-fashioned nutmeg grinders, first of all, it will make your nose very happy and your heart happy because the smell is incredible. Cinnamon. Really, you can add whatever you love. I adore ginger with pears and apples. I'm going to add some dried ginger and a little touch of allspice.
If you had pumpkin pie spice or apple pie spice, go for it.
You could do this with pumpkin slices or pumpkin puree for sure. Okay, going to give that a stir. And then again, because it's the fall and it's apple season, I have some local apple cider. This is going to moisten it just a little and bring out the apple. I added about 1.5 tablespoons, 2 tablespoons. And then I'm going to add a little bit of flour because I want to thicken the apple cider, and the fruit's going to give off juices. Again, and
that looks so great. Oh my gosh.
It smells so incredible with the cinnamon. Okay, now the fun part. Move all the dirty stuff to the side. And I'm going to bring our pastry back. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pile the fruit into the middle, leaving a 2-inch border, and you'll see why. If you want to, you can get really fancy and lay them out like this, you know, French style, put some pears in. I prefer to just kind of put them all in and let them go where they go.
Kathy, there's a question that says, it appears that you peeled the pears, but not the apple. Is that what you did?
I peeled most of the apple, but not all of it. I'm taking my apple cider and sugar and flour, putting it on there. Whoops. I'm going to pour the rest on. Now this
I've done it both ways. You know, sometimes I'll leave the skins on, sometimes I won't. It's like,
the pear skins were kind of nasty. So here's what I'm doing now. I'm pulling the pastry up, and then just to neaten it, I'm tucking the edge in. Can you see that?
mm-hmm.
Again, pulling it up, just giving it the slightest little tuck in, sort of like folding a blanket on a bed. And here we go again. And some parts are going to come in more. I'm going to tuck. Again here, tuck. And I'm giving it the gentlest press here. Nothing fancy. This is what I adore about this sort of rustic look. This is the kind of pie that you should start with if you're one of those people that says, oh, no, I can't bake a pie. That's way, way too hard. Those extra juices are going to be delicious. And then I'm going to pop it into a hot preheated oven for about 15 minutes. Brush the edges with heavy cream if you like, and then bake it for another 35 minutes. And
Kathy, there's a question. What did you preheat the oven to?
I preheated the oven, I believe, to 350.
No, it was 425.
Thank you, 425. And this is what it looks like. It's quite beautiful. Let me put it on the plate.
So yes, what I like to do is to get that zap first of the high heat. So we start at 425, right. And then depending on the fruit, what is in there, turn it down either to 375 or 350. When I say depending on the fruit, like how long it has to cook. One of the things that that looks fantastic, Kathy.
I really, really virtually want you to know that I'm cutting this up and feeding each and every one of you. I so wish I could.
And one of the things is to look at both the juiciness of the fruit, but really make sure there you go. You can see those sort of like burnished edges a little bit.
And that's the cider and the natural pear juices. And this is just a beautiful dessert to think about for Thanksgiving. But honestly, if you make your pastry ahead of time, you can sort of pull this together on a Tuesday night. Or it can be your dinner with the blue cheese and rosemary and onions and apples, and whatever combination you're thinking, it will work.
Oh my God, Karen just asked, would figs work in this recipe? And oh my God, yes. I actually you could use fresh figs or either fig jam. So I was traveling and got this really fantastic fig jam and dollop that in, or you could brush it on yeah, Karen, you're speaking my language. I am a fig person.
Figs, caramelized onion, and blue cheese. You could go sweet or savory with the figs, but as far as I'm concerned, anything with figs is just a major treat.
Yes.
Catherine's now going to take us to show us one of our favorite recipes, Don't Call Me Honey Cupcakes. Throughout the book, the book's filled with some pretty heavy issues. I'm going to read a little of the introduction. while she's working, and you'll get a better sense of what it's all about. But it was really important to us that there was also humor in this book. So this recipe is called Don't Call Me Honey Cupcakes. You want to talk about it? And I'll check the questions as you're working.
Yes. Okay. So this is a basic cupcake that we made. So, and when we were talking about the designing the recipes, our recipes, and I want to just say that we are sharing recipes of ours from Kathy and I, but this book was really important for us that it was not just us. There are 40 women contributors in this book, writers, artists, singers, singer-songwriters, producers, amazing bakers like Greenspan is in the book. But we wanted the recipes to be really accessible. So that when I was and I was really kind of obsessed with the idea of a honey cupcake, and this, you know, sometimes when you're developing recipes, you get an idea for a title, and I was like, I know I have to have Don't Call Me Honey Cake. And when I was doing this, I wanted to make sure that this was not using like a lot of fancy ingredients. It's things you have. So this has butter, flour, sugar, plain yogurt, and honey, and baking powder and baking soda in there. And okay, there's butter. Yes, I said butter. A very simple cupcake that's made. You mix it together, fold it in, and then a little bit of that nutmeg, which really accents the honey in there. And then it's topped with a cream cheese frosting. And, you know, when I was doing this today, I was like, my niece was here, was like, whoever invented cream cheese frosting was sort of a genius.
Totally.
And there's a little bit of honey in there to do that as well. But with all that honey, I wanted both a little bit more texture and something fun to go along with it on top. So I decided to make a honeycomb, and I'm going to show you how to make the honeycomb. The technique for making the would be very standard: mix, fold, put that in, bake, and they bake for about 20 minutes. And they freeze wonderfully as well. So if my assistant will follow me over to the stove.
Magic. This is a great experiment, because it's like a science experiment to do with very well supervised children, because it is really magical.
Yeah, so this is sugar. I've got about a half a cup of sugar in here. I'm going to add in a 1/4 cup of light corn syrup, which is important in keeping the sugar from crystallizing. And then I'm going to add in 2 tablespoons of honey for the flavor. And I'm using just an orange blossom, regular old honey, nothing really special. But honey is one of those things that has so many different varieties to it. Like a blueberry honey will almost taste like maple syrup. And I'm going to put in about 2 tablespoons of water. Now the whole thing about when you're caramelizing sugar is once it starts going, you kind of don't want to stir it. So I'm stirring this just at the beginning.
What's your heat at, Catherine?
It's not on at all.
Oh.
Okay. So what I look for is I always think of my baking teacher, and he always used to say, when you make caramel, add enough water so that it looks a little bit like wet sand. So once it's all mixed together, it looks like wet sand. I am going to turn this on. And this takes about 6 to 8 minutes. So I'm gonna put in my candy thermometer, and I'm gonna cook it to 300 degrees, which are about 290 on my candy thermometer, which is also known as hard crack. If you are super hardcore, which when I was teaching and as a pastry chef, I could put my fingers in and put it in cold water and feel that hard crack, but I am not going to suggest that.
Do not do that at home.
I'm not doing that, but that's what hard crack, which gives it that nice, crack of candy, right? So basically I'm making candy here.
Let me just interrupt you for a second. Karen just asked, have we tried any of these recipes with whole wheat rather than white? And absolutely, Karen, particularly the galette, you might want to do it half and half, 90 white, 90 whole wheat, but several of the recipes in the book use all whole wheat, many whole grains. There's also some gluten-free recipes as well. So it's a great question. Usually if you're introducing whole wheat into a recipe that doesn't call for it, you want to just add about half and half to balance it out.
And there's now a wonderful product that you have, which is called like white whole wheat, which sort of is not as dense. It has a little bit, it's still a whole wheat flour. But the thing that's happened with flours, and we have a bunch of sources in the book for getting regional flours that have different qualities to it, whether it's a rye flour. We have a wonderful cornbread in the book with a red corn called Bloody Butcher, which is delicious. And it has this like fragrant, almost sort of floral quality to it. And it cooks like this sort of, when we were making it, Kathy, it was kind of like this violet color. And of course,
it almost was
it's really appropriate Halloween kind of.
Yeah, it's worth sourcing out. I just wanted to say what Catherine's doing now is one of those moments in a baking recipe that I call don't answer the phone, don't go on Instagram, don't look at Facebook. This requires a steady eye because this can go from bubbling sugar to burnt disaster. If you take your eyes off it, the phone rings. So I'm gonna let her boil. And is this a good time to read, Katherine?
It's great. And just I wanted to point out that I am not the only, I mean, I've got my candy thermometer in here, but I'm not gonna whisk it anymore. If it's cooking unevenly, I will swirl it. But what you don't want to do is reintroduce small crystals back into it because that's when the sugar can recrystallize.
Exactly.
That's actually never happened to me. I just know that's the theory, the science of it, because this just works, you know, by adding the light corn syrup in there. But Kathy, go ahead and read. I'm on my timer.
All right.
And I'm feeling thready.
Okay, great.
It's going up.
Let me know when you need me to stop, and let's keep the camera down on the, yeah, there you go. So this is a little bit of the introduction, which will explain to you how Katherine and I came to this project of Rage Baking. So it was exactly 2 years ago, September 2018. I was glued to the television. I listened all day as the Senate grilled Dr. Christine Blasey Ford about the incident, as they called it, with Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. Here we are 2 years later, watching it happen again. I watched as Rachel Mitchell, a female prosecutor from Arizona, the woman puppet for the men in gray suits, asked the same questions over and over again. And I remember thinking, why is this called a hearing? No one is really listening to Dr. Ford. I kept asking myself, why would this woman risk her career, family, safety, and reputation to challenge a Supreme Court nominee if it never really happened? A line from the song in the musical Hamilton kept running through my head. No one else was in the room when it happened. And I remember thinking towards the end of the hearing, when it became clear that despite all the testimony, they would push Kavanaugh through. Women don't get heard. Women are considered hysterical if they sound the alarm over a man's bad behavior, instead of accepting the old logic that boys will be boys. I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. That week, late one night, I found myself in the kitchen, pulling flour, sugar, butter, and baking powder out of the pantry. I decided to bake a simple almond cake topped with late summer fruit. I scooped out the flour and made sure it was perfectly level in my measuring cup. I softened the butter. I listened to the whole almonds growl as I chopped them in my blender. I peeled ripe peaches and caught every last drop of their sweet juice in my batter. I scattered the last of the tart wild Maine blueberries on top, and a few hours later, I had a gorgeous cake and a calmer heart. The UPS man rang my doorbell with a delivery, and I handed him the cake and a batch of cookies. He looked at me with an expression that was both grateful and perplexed. I didn't try to explain. Did the baking stop the rage? Hell no. Did the baking make all the lies and deceit and behind the scene dealings feel less menacing? No, not one bit. Did the baking make me feel less afraid of the erosion of democracy I was witnessing as I listened to the evening news? No, it didn't really do any of those things. What the baking did was reset my focus for a few short hours. It became a balm, a meditation of sort. Baking was a way of temporarily restoring my belief in the positive transformation of things. In this case, butter, flour, sugar, and fruit. Each day, as the political outrages piled up, my mind was absorbed in the precision and focus and discipline that baking requires. A simple cake took me away from the news cycle. It was the calmest I'd felt since the Kavanaugh hearings were announced. And it goes on. And
Okay, Kathy, I'm coming.
okay, we
Coming
got
over.
some here.
So we've taken this up to 290.
This is such a great metaphor for rage.
Yes, and so now I'm going to add in the baking powder.
Boom!
And you can see that it becomes this crazy volcanic thing.
This is the part the kids love.
And this is your basic science project. I'm gonna pull some of this out of here. Do not touch it, but it will cool down. Give me a little bit. And it, oh my God, it has that wonderful caramel aroma to it and that growl. Now what I just did was put just water right into the pot and just I'm gonna return that to the stove to clean. It will be the easiest thing that you can to clean. And here is my honeycomb. If you can see this candy, it's like bubbling. Don't touch it. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes. It will cool. And through the magic of, here's my swap out. I made this earlier today.
And did you cool it at room temperature?
Yes, you cool it at room temperature. And here it is. And it's kind of, it's like that honeycomb candy. And I just crack it. I'm sorry, Kathy, what?
Kathy Spivey, who's watching, would like to know how much baking powder.
It's baking soda and it's 1 teaspoon. 1 teaspoon and you add it in. And I'm gonna let it, like, I crack and break into pieces. And here I go back to my cupcake. And I love this technique for icing cupcakes.
Lower your camera a bit.
Okay. Okay, so it's like my standard cream cheese frosting. I blended the cream cheese with some honey. I don't want to use all honey because it becomes too cloying. So it's some honey, 2 tablespoons of honey, 3/4 cup confectioner's sugar, a little bit of lemon juice to balance the sweetness, and cream cheese, 12 ounces of cream cheese. Just blend the hell out of it. I made this earlier today, it was cool in my kitchen, so I left it at room temperature. In the summer, sometimes I'll put it in the refrigerator to set up a little bit. I have my ice cream scoop. And I take my scoop.
This is a great trick, you guys.
I scoop it down. I just put the ball right there on top and then just tap it.
Can we move the camera a little bit down?
Yeah.
Yep.
And you just tap it and you get this, like, it evenly, I just iced my cupcake. Isn't that awesome?
Or is that brilliant?
It's just so simple. And so, and this will be awesome just on its own, but for a little contrast, I'm just gonna put a little bit of this honeycomb on top. And if you didn't want to use the honeycomb, you could use, some of the dried apple, those honey, and I also think about those honey nut candies that we get at Halloween. You could use that if you didn't want to make the cupcake. You could just put some nuts on top of there. But the thing with the honeycomb is it gets a little bit of that, a little edge of that, like, burnt caramel, which works really wonderfully with the honey. And so you get that texture and the sort of, like, my niece is here and she was like, oh, it has a little bit of, it's a little smoky and delicious with the cream cheese, and it adds a lot more complexity to it.
Remember that candy we had when we were kids called Bit of Honey?
Oh yeah, just like that.
That into 2020 the most brilliant way. This is there's also a wonderful recipe in the book for parsnip cupcakes. It's like a carrot cake cupcake, but you use parsnips, the earthy root vegetables, and those honeycomb candies would be amazing on top of those for Thanksgiving. Oh, I want one of those very badly, as does everybody, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, and the one thing I will say to be aware, like it's raining cats and dogs here in New York. Honey, and this is one of my favorite words ever, is a humectant. So if you I just have to say that all the time. It's a humectant. And so it gets a little tacky. So if you're going to do this, don't put them on, don't put this on till right, but like you can ice them, which is what I have done.
But just top them right before you serve them.
Right before you serve them. Yeah. So I have my little.
Shut the show off.
I'm trying, I'm trying. But you don't have to make the honeycomb. It's a fun thing. Let's be honest, we're home with our kids. And this is a great science project to show the way the baking soda interacts with the sugar and you get that volcanic reaction. And sometimes, in the rage, the head note to this is, if some dude is calling you like honey and thinks it's really cute and everything, and internally, you just kind of hold it in. When I watch this volcanic flow up, it sometimes speaks to the rage that I might have. But this is very sweet.
They're very beautiful. I wanted to let everyone know that Rage Baking is available through the Six Bridges Book Festival on their website through Wordsworth Book. We have autographed book plates for you if you're interested. Holidays are coming up. There are also shirts for $25 from the Six Bridges Book Festival. So that's just a little public service announcement. So,
and also, I mean, something we also want to say about this book is when Kathy and I conceptualized this book, between the two of us, we have decades of experience. And we knew that we didn't want this book to just be about us. And that's why there are over 40 different women who are in this from all different backgrounds. The range of recipes are savory. There's wonderful flatbreads and granola, and there's an amazing chocolate pudding from So Simple and Easy from Alice Medrick. The recipes are very doable from great women, top of their game. But also we wanted this book to be pro-social. And so 25% of the proceeds from this book go to Emily's List in support of women candidates to get more women's voices in the political system. So,
and Emily's List is really,
and you need to, yes, share.
So I always thought that there was a woman named Emily started, but it's an acronym that stands for Early Money is Like Yeast, which is such a wonderful metaphor for a book called Rage Baking. But the idea that women need help at the beginning, just like yeast in bread, to rise. And Emily's List works with everybody from women running for small local offices straight up to hopefully the next VP, Kamala Harris, and women who would like to run for president. So we felt it was a really worthwhile cause. This book is very women driven, not exclusively for women, but as Katherine noted, there are over 40 contributors. There are interviews with Ani DeFranco. There's recipes from Ruth Reichel, who was the New York Times food critic, for an oatmeal cookie that has 5 ingredients that you can make with a 3-year-old. And you'll look at this recipe and you'll say, something's missing. There's no way that's the recipe. And there are these lacy, addictive, delicious cookies. And then there's a chocolate cake that'll take you a good part of 5 hours and everything in between. We really wrote the book for the home cook. You do not have to be a professional baker to attempt these recipes. But what's unusual about the book is that there are all these women contributors, but also there are essays to read and poems to read and gorgeous photography to look at. Once you put that pie in the oven and your kitchen starts to smell wonderful, we hope that you'll sit down and read one of these essays that are all about or peripherally addressing the idea of rage and what's going on in America today, what's happening in Washington. And, we are at this incredibly important moment where we need to get out there and vote and create some change, because it's a little scary, or it's a lot scary.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, the idea we had behind the book was like one of our favorite recipes is from the fantastic Elle Simone, who is at Cook's at America's Test Kitchen. And she sent us, Elle worked with me at Food Network years ago. And when I reached out to her, she was like, oh, of course I want to be part of this book. This is great. She sent us, she goes, I know exactly what I'm going to send you this recipe for the most amazing lemon pound cake. Bundt cake that was her grandmother's recipe. And she sent us the recipe and it was great. And then she said, you know, I'd like to send you a poem. And I, you know, we were moving really fast to get this book out. And I said, sure, Elle, you know, send us a poem. And it's an incredible poem to Mother Ann, her grandmother, who would, during the Jim Crow South, when she sent her children north to the rest of the family in Detroit to be safe. And all the food and this lemon pound cake, she would wrap up and send along with her grandchildren. And you can't read that poem while the smell is in your kitchen and without being moved to realize, you know, it's more than the sum of its parts. It's really telling a story. And this is woven throughout the book, the stories that people are telling, amazing young and established writers from Jessica Harris to Osayi Endelin, to Jennifer Boylan, who is a contributing editor to the opinion section in the New York Times. All different sorts of women from all different backgrounds. You'll find baklava and vinegar pie. I mean, it's a really eclectic, but at its soul, it's about the passion and community that women bring together to resourcefulness, and also to turn these really difficult times that we're in into something that starts to make sense. And that's where we really are.
One of the things that I've spent a lot of time thinking about during the pandemic is, how do you build community when you can't be with people? How do you replicate that undeniably wonderful experience of sitting at a table with the people you love? And we can't do that safely right now. And we have the holidays coming up and we have to rethink that. And throughout the pandemic, I've been baking like crazy, particularly in the winter, and just dropping them on the doorsteps of neighbors. I have an elderly neighbor who didn't go out for months. I packaged up bunches of cookies, and then someone else gave me sourdough starter. And at some point around mid-April, I thought, we're redefining what it means to have community and be together. And baking is such a powerful way to try to do that. I did want to show you all something, because here we are, you know, they're going to push through another Supreme Court nominee. We are in the middle of this contentious, insane election. We're in the middle of a pandemic. And when we went to put this book together, my mother-in-law, Nancy Rudolph, was a photojournalist. We lost her several years ago. But I had the memory when we were putting together the book that she had a box of black and white photographs that said women's marches. And I found this photo of one of the very first women's marches in front of the White House. It's 1964. They have on fur coats, high heels, and they're carrying white peace balloons. And the book is scattered with her beautiful old vintage photographs of women's marches. And it's very moving to me that he's in there and that these photos are in there. And then of course we have gorgeous color photography by a very talented photographer named Jarell Guy. Here's a baklava and the galettes in there, and she's a food stylist based in Texas, and very spectacular. So every aspect of this, we wanted richness, we wanted women's voices. We found that when we started the book, I personally was feeling a lot of despair, watching those Kavanaugh hearings, thinking about what women had to go through, thinking about decades of women being quieted and being told not to use their voice. And by the time we were ready to hand in the manuscript and we had these beautiful essays and poems and interviews with women, I felt a sense of hope that when we come together and when we use our voice, we're very powerful and we really can promote change. So please, please get out there and vote. And
Yes.
make a plan, help someone get to the polls, and that's very much a message. Yeah, this is Catherine's cheddar cheese and apple slab pie with the message, vote. The most important word we're going to say for the next few weeks. I just filled out my ballot, and it was one of the most empowering moments I've had since the pandemic began, because it is something we can actually do. And hopefully everybody's going to find that they're able to vote, and you get the point.
Together.
We
So
have
we have a couple minutes left. If anyone has any questions that they want to ask, or any baking questions, or about the book, or whatever, we're open for it. And we really appreciate everyone coming together today, you know, in this virtual world that we're creating. It's kind of amazing. The one bad thing about it is I have a house now full of cupcakes and cookies. And thank God I have our niece here, but oh my God. Someone just asked, will there be a volume 2?
We hope so. Who knows?
Hopefully we won't need that. But I have to say, I think that Kathy and I would love to work together and do another book. It's been amazing as a collaborative experience, and realizing how women can really work together in a really, really powerful way, in a different way. I mean, this book came together in, well, really in about 4 months, from start to finish. And when we put it out there and asked and just sort of sent the queries out to people that we knew and people we didn't know, would you want to be part of this book? The resounding answer was, hell yeah. So that sense of community really restores me now. And to think, and like, it feels like a decade ago, but it feels really good that women and men and everyone are really working together.
Somebody just wrote in, just made squirrel dumplings with my 96-year-old Mississippi neighbor. What a gift from her. Wow. Squirrel dumplings is something I have never had.
Yeah.
That sounds like quite an experience. And a 96-year-old neighbor, how fabulous.
Yes, I mean, right. It makes me think of, oh my God, I'm having a senior moment myself. Who is the 90s? Betty Fussel's spice cookies, which are delicious. And wonderful. She is as sharp and bright as ever. It's kind of amazing.
She's a beautiful woman, food writer. She wrote the Fanny Farmer baking book, and she is going strong. And she contributed a beautiful cookie that has black pepper in it to try to, you know, get the rage out. There's also some savory recipes in here. One of my favorites is pigs in a blanket, which I dedicated to the men of Alabama who are trying desperately to take women's rights away. It just felt appropriate. We knew we had to have a recipe for pigs in a blanket, and it uses pre-made puff pastry and spicy chorizo sausage. And all I say in the introduction is, bite hard.
And just for those bakers, since this is like a cooking class, in every chapter, it's hard to see on here, but in every chapter we have a spread that is like cookie wisdom or bread wisdom or cake wisdom or pie wisdom to hold your hand or inform you a little bit more or learn a little bit more so you can be successful. And that's really what we want, is like, we want people to go into the kitchen and not feel like they don't know what's going on, or the recipe doesn't answer all their questions. We want to feel grounded and have that sort of balm, as Kathy was talking about. And I will say, I spent 20 years at Food Network testing recipes, and that was really important to me, that people would feel successful and that the recipes work.
I hope that when you're baking from Rage Baking, you will hear us whispering in your ear saying, you go, woman, you go, girl, that's it. Because hopefully, you know, your results are going to look like the pictures. We didn't leave any fancy tricks out. So we are just about at 9 o'clock, and I want to thank everybody.
8 o'clock on Central Time.
8 o'clock Central Time. Sorry, we're on the East Coast, getting to be my bedtime. Thank you so much for joining us, and please get out there and vote, and please use your voices to create the change that you want to see in the kitchen, out of the kitchen, everywhere. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been great to see your comments here, and awesome. Ray John.
Thank you to the Book Festival for hosting.
Yes, thank you, Brad and Grayson and the whole team. It's been such a pleasure to be part of it, and we hope we can, we're sad we can't be there, but it's been extraordinary the way they brought us all together.
Rage bake, everybody. Thank you so much. Good night.
Good night.